No, le estoy hablando yo. Le estoy hablando yo, le estoy hablando yo.
Energía, insumo fundamental para el desarrollo de la humanidad. Sin ella, el mundo que conocemos no sería posible. A lo largo de la historia, hemos buscado diversas formas de obtenerla y utilizarla, proceso que ha resultado en la predominancia de las fuentes fósiles en la matriz energética. Sin embargo, sus emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero han provocado daños severos en la salud del planeta, con consecuencias que potencialmente pueden comprometer la vida en la Tierra. Al ritmo de emisiones actuales,
At the rhythm of current emissions, we've got 28 years to limit the increase of the temperature to 2 centigrades and 9 years to limit it to 1.5 degrees. So we need a new energy transition, new ways of producing energy with low emissions, electrification, energy efficiency, and behavioral change, development of technology to capture, use, and store carbon. So we need innovation and knowledge, how to advance with energy transition, to look at economic growth and development in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a region where some countries depend strongly on the income reduced by the exploitation of fossil fuels. How to use them to transform the economy in our region. CAF, the Bank of Development for Latin America and the Caribbean, report of economy and development, renewed energy for a sustainable development, energy systems, transport, industry sector, residential sector. CAF, Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of CAF, Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Business School of the Adolfo Ibáñez University, I welcome you, each one of you, at this ceremony that we carry out in the postgraduate area of the university. It's a pleasure to accompany you in the regional launch of the report of energy, economy and development of CAF, which is called Renewed Energy Transition, which is fair for sustainable development. Today, we are here with prominent speakers to talk about the challenges in our region in renewable energy, energy grids, regional energy grids, as well as the progressive situation of fossil fuels with cleaner alternatives, energy efficiency, and sustainable practices. This event is being transmitted in English, Spanish, and Portuguese on the website CAF.com. We would like to invite all of you to share your opinions on social networks and CAF, and follow at CAF, X, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as the X at UAI. I would like to invite Juan Carlos Jovet of the Business School of the Adolfo Ibáñez University. A warm round of applause for him. Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you at the Adolfo Ibáñez University. It's a pleasure to see you here. Special greetings for Minister Maestra Roja, Sergio Viegranado. Thank you for accompanying us, and all the CAF team, all the friends from the house. I would like to briefly just give you these welcome words here at the university. We believe that many challenges that we face as a country and as humanity, climate change probably is the most urgent. We've understood that energy is the main source of that problem, the main source of emissions. Latin America is a region with lots of natural resources, and this, of course, implies a responsibility. We've got the responsibility to export these clean and abundant energy to other countries that don't have it. And of course, this implies opportunities, because if we do things well, we can make our economy more competitive, we can create jobs, infrastructure, modernize things, how we do things, improve the quality of life. And this, of course, for that, we have to collaborate all together. Chile and other countries in the region, there are many public policies that are difficult to agree upon. But I think in Chile there is one thing which is probably the ones that we've reached best consensuses on, is renewable energy. Of course, we have a common agenda that is included in all agendas, political agendas. So and that is the fruit of dialogue, collaboration, open discussions, and exchange of ideas, which, of course, is the essence of university. University wants to, of course, be a source of knowledge, and for the people, we give to the people, or to the polis, like Plato said, the ways of solving problems and to reason. For us, therefore, it's an honor to be this venue to organize this launch. The experts will talk about the content. I just would like to say that I'm happy that we are together here, that we have this space for conversation, discussion, and that CAF has chosen us for this venue. And every time when we generate dialogue and conversation, that's very important. Thank you for coming here, especially in this on this cold and rainy day. I think we can close the windows. Yes, that's right, if you want to. We will ask the organization to close the windows. That's not climate change. This is just a problem of ventilation. Thanks again to all of you for coming. And let's just continue with the program. Thank you very much, Mr. Dean, for these words. And of course, we will close the windows because we don't want anybody to get a cold. Now we have such changing temperatures. I would like to invite Sergio Díaz-Granados, Executive President of CAF. Welcome to you. Now, have you seen the size of the report? I don't know whether there is time to read it all, but it's very long. I would first like to greet the Minister Maisa Rojas, Minister of the Environment. Thank you very much for being here. And we know that Minister Pardo couldn't be there. He wanted to be here, but at the last minute, he had to be somewhere else in other activities. We would like to thank Juan Carlos, of course, for his presentation, and the Adolfo Ibáñez University for the activity. And to present with support, we would like to say hello to the entire team of the CAF, of course, the chief of the cabinet, the manager of knowledge, the team that makes this possible today. The study was carried out by Lia Marús and Carlos Álvarez, and of course, Verónica Pisanto here present as well. I would like to greet the managers of infrastructure and the vice president of the private sector. And basically, I want to give you 4 messages. First, the relation between CAF and Chile. It's a very special relationship because Chile was a founder in 58, a very complex moment for Latin America. Chile and Colombia and Bolivia and Ecuador and Venezuela created this institution, which is 56 years old now. This institution that has supplied not only funding, but also capacity to dialogue between the countries and promote, of course, a better integration, which is one of the biggest challenges here, and integration on all fronts. And this process of the relationship with CAF and Chile has been much more active in the past years. That's also why we are launching this report here with the university. For the first year, we do the first assembly of the countries, the first time in Chile, and we've increased our operational capacity in Chile as well. New programs that we're presenting here. President Boric presented these strategies of the country with CAF and Chile, which has to do with energy transition, of course, and our interest is to help the country, the private sector, the public sector, governments, regional governments, to accompany these triple challenges that we have in Latin America: environmental transition, energy transition, digital transition. And those transitions must be fair and just and leave nobody behind. And I think that's one of our first ambitions. And in general, the strategies that we've built in dialogue with the private sector, with the academia, with the national government and regional governments, we target deficits that we have in Latin America and the Caribbean. Chile has a deficit of growth and of hope as well, which we can see in Latin America and the Caribbean. These three deficits, growth, trust, and hope, direct to the strategies. That's what the strategies as a country and the region direct to. That's why today, and this is my second message, we have this presence for this RED, the Report for Economy and Development. CAF also gives not only funding, but also knowledge with a bias, which is the knowledge of the region, through the region, by the region, and for the region, or from the region, for the problems that the region has. In 2004, the first report started, with how to take back growth, how to start back on the path of growth. That question was asked 20 years ago, and the question is still valid today. The questions asked by the report are still valid 10 and 20 years afterwards. So the existential or philosophical question of the report of 2004 is still valid today. And a few weeks ago, we were in Ecuador talking about inequality, and 20 years ago, CAF made a report. We want Latin America safer, and we talked about the concern that we had about the growth and the safety of the region. And today, we are in a scenario that CAF talked about 10 years ago, so we have to update that study, we can optimize it to find out new realities and studies, but these reports are done to think about things that are important, topics that are crucial for Latin America and the Caribbean. The question today is, how can we have an energy transition which is, above all, just and fair, that recognizes reality in Latin America and the Caribbean, like Juan Carlos also said, is a way of having different energies. And of course, we shouldn't renounce as a civilization to what we have accumulated so far, but we are also conscious of the disbalance that we have produced, the unbalance, and these questions are reflected in the report. So this is the second message. We do these reports, we make these reports with some kind of bias. There's a report thought for Latin America to be answered by Latin America, questions about Latin America, and based on that, of course, we can go to the third message, which is, what is this report about? And of course, I won't give you any spoilers, because there are people who will present it today. But basically, I want to tell you that every time when we produce a report, there is a planning of about 2 years in the process. So they are born after a long process of reflection, of dialogues of our specialists, but also other specialists outside CAF, and interactive dialogues in different areas of the region. And every time these reports are more exhaustive, more comprehensive. So I want to ask you to read it, to review it, to contrast it, and I hope it helps to stimulate dialogue and conversation among our countries. Some messages of this report is that it offers a roadmap based on evidence, so that the countries of the region can have a sustainable development and growth. Of course, this is a heterogeneous region in terms of the sizes of the countries, the energy grid. There is lots of access to fossil fuels in some countries, other countries that have not, some countries that are better equipped for energy transition, others that have a larger deficit. But of course, there are other things that are the challenges that we have in the relationship. Now, we have, this report has several messages. It evaluates the fiscal and economic benefits and what we need for the transition. First, of course, political commitment, which Juan Carlos mentioned as well. We've talked about this today, the whole day. There are media from more than 11 countries in Latin America and Caribbean that are sharing the report and know that each country of the region is different in terms of size. In island countries, the report tries to pick up the realities of all these countries, but of course, for the transition, the first ingredient is political commitment. Political will. Second is infrastructure. We need much more infrastructure for the connection and more infrastructure to make it more efficient. The third, of course, is an accelerated pace of innovation to bring innovation to the region. And fourth, which I think is essential for transition, of course, is funding, and development banks play a central role to be able to catalyze this private sector. believe that one, which is, of course, one of the main stakeholders in the energy transition, we will see that we need to increase the electrification and production of gas in another will to minimize the impact of emissions associated with fuel consumption. And here we have to think, in January actually this year, in conversation in Chile, we went to the Patagonia, the south of the country, with Pablo, the chief of cabinet. We went to Aysén and Coyhaique, and it's incomprehensible that an area like Aysén and a city as Coyhaique have in contamination, air contamination so high in certain periods of the year. So then we say here we need to have the capacity of answers of development banks and the private sector to carry out energy transition in this area. We can't leave not one single city or village of the country and of the region behind. We need to get to any corner of the Latin American countries and the Caribbean. When we talk to local authorities, we've been talking about what we can do. We can't abandon any project, small or large. So efficiency is the way to work in energy systems. We're in a transition process with light and shadows. We have a region which we consider we are optimistic. It's a region that has the capacity to offer solutions. There are problems that have been solved. There have been reforms that have dealt with certain problems, and we think that if we give more commitment and will and coordination between the countries, we can get to these solutions altogether. So with this, I go to my fourth message, which is that the report is not just a document, and we want to translate these thoughts and this knowledge of the bank into operations that help us to make programs. And of course, each reality of each country is different. And there are things in the document that are not useful for Chile or for a Caribbean country, but in general, the recommendations of this document will be useful for the teams in each country, so they can see how we can adjust this question, how we can get to a just energy transition, and the framework that has to be behind that answer. And I would like to thank again the CAF team to make this report possible. Veronica, we have finished now these 20 years of our support to this discussion, and now we hope that this document throughout the years will become a source of reflection about things that won't just last 1 year. But this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, I came from Rio de Janeiro. I was at the forum of the Public Investment Fund to look at the possibility to bring resources from other areas towards Latin America. We have a partner like the Development Bank to see where the resources are in the world to bring them to this region. So one of the things which maybe is not mentioned in the study, probably not because it's not the focus, but one of the things that we will see is how digital development and energy transition have to go hand in hand. We in the 21st century, of course, won't have the quality that we have today. We need more quality of life, and many of the services that we will have to increase quality of life will need more energy. And of course, we can't consume like we're doing it this way today. So that's why for operation of artificial intelligence, for example, that we talk about a lot, we know what this means now. Energy consumption is higher than what we've been using today. So we will need more and more energy for that consumption. more connections, more data, and more processing capacity, and that will require more energy. So the question is, what kind of energy will help with this digital transition, and what we'll need? And ChatGPT, for example, that has come to many countries, many homes, and the equivalent of that consumption is 1 day of functioning of ChatGPT, the same as Los Angeles. So if we look in numbers, we can see how exponential this is. We will require more energy and more energy efficiency. And of course, we can't have an increase in fossil fuels. So we need a quick transition because of the planet and for a better quality of life and to have better services. So I think that the question of this report feed this discussion, and they help us to show us the road ahead to have a region that is more committed to climate change and to guarantee the quality of life of the citizens in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President, for these words. Now I would like to invite to this podium the Minister of the Environment of the Republic of Chile, Ms. Maisa Rojas, and we thank her for her presence, and we receive her with a great round of applause.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Saludo.
Hello, it's a bit too high. Hello, everyone. And the first thing I would like to say is that it's good news that the Development Bank of a region helps us to think about and reflect on this research to be able to make decisions based on evidence on how the region needs to carry out this transition to renewable energies, a transition that definitely needs to be fair towards sustainable development. Thanks to CAF for gathering this issue, taking this issue. I couldn't be more in agreement that it's, of course, relevant, and I couldn't be more in agreement on the 4 elements that were mentioned by here, the president of CAF, on what elements are required for this transition. Political commitment, infrastructure, innovation, and financing. This political commitment exists here. It's been a government policy, and it's manifested in different areas. And since 2022, we have a legal framework for climate change that provides this umbrella that says at the latest on 2050 we will be carbon neutral and resilient on the adverse effect of climate change. And this is good news because it gives us this roadmap, this North Star towards where we need to go. And it's a bill or a law that involves the whole government, the whole state, and we have a long-term vision which involves the whole state fully, not only 17 ministries that signed that law, but also, as a matter of fact, Juan Carlos should have signed it at least twice, no? Probably, yeah? Okay. So, then, also the regional governments, the district or the county governments, and the whole society involving the private sector. So let me briefly mention what, without having read the report, the things that have happened in Chile. I believe the framework is very structuring in this sense, and the law forces us to draft a mitigation and adaptation plan, of course, take charge and see how we are going to fulfill these both objectives, resiliency and carbon neutrality. Last week, we had the first approval of a plan. There are several plans, and we're going to be all the rest of the year looking at plans, approving them in the Council of Ministers on sustainability and climate change. We are going to have to adapt, for example, the cattle industry and the farming industry to this, and they need to be reportable, verifiable, and to be able to verify the advances.
Tenemos claro de que esta es una situación
We're
urgente.
clear this is an urgent situation, and therefore,
Esa urgencia nos
this urgency
obliga a,
forces
por un
us,
lado,
on one hand, to
tener instituciones que
have
sean
institutions
capaces
that
de
are
responder
able to respond
a esta urgencia,
to this
y ahí
urgency,
nosotros tenemos
and there we have
unos cuantos
a
proyectos
few
de ley que
projects
están en el Congreso que
or
nos debieran
bills
ayudar
that
a dar este sentido de urgencia,
are
pero
going to help provide
fortaleciendo
this
la
sense of urgency, but
institucionalidad también,
strengthening the
modernizándola y
institution as
fortaleciendo.
well.
Me refiero
When
a
I
la
mean,
reforma
say, strengthening, I'm
ambiental
talking about, for
2.0 que
example,
le llamamos, que es una
environmental
reforma
reform 2.0,
enfocada
which is a
a
reform
nuestro sistema de
focused
evaluación de
on
impacto
our
ambiental, pero también a
environmental
la
impact assessment
superintendencia de medio
system,
ambiente,
and
así como
with
para tener
which
una
the
institución
superintendency of the environment
robusta que
works,
sea
which is a
capaz
solid
de
institution,
estar a corto
robust,
tiempo
according
para enfrentar esta
to the
crisis,
times to be able to face
tres
these
crisis en
three
realidad.
crises.
Para nosotros también ha sido
And
muy relevante
it's
la
very
palabra que
relevant,
aparece ahí
the
también,
words that
esta transición
you
tiene
can
que
see on the
ser
screen, that this
justa,
transition needs to be fair,
porque la
because
realidad
the reality is,
de nuestro país
in our
y ha
country,
sido en general la realidad
and
de
in
los
general,
países
it's
es
been the
que
reality of all
los
other countries, is that the
desarrollos,
development,
yo a veces lo digo así como
I
el
always say
desarrollo
it like
más
that,
sucio
you
del
know, the
siglo XX,
dirtiest development of
se
the
hizo
20th
a costa de
century
ciertos
was
territorios que
made
pagaron costos muy altos y que no se
at
vieron
the expense of
beneficiados, sino que
several
más bien
territories
pagaron
that
los
paid
costos,
a really high
y que
cost,
ahora
and they got no
no debiera volver
benefits,
a ocurrir.
and this shouldn't happen again,
Porque todos los
because
beneficios
all
que
the
trae esta transición
benefits
debieran
of these
repartirse de
transitions
manera
should
más
be
equitativa.
shared
Y aquí
more
déjeme
equitably.
darle
And
dos ejemplos.
here, let me give you two examples.
Esto probablemente lo habría dicho el ministro
Probably
Pardo, pero yo creo que es una muy
Minister
buena
Pardo would have
noticia,
said this, but I believe this is
cuando
good
tuvo
news
que legislar
when
la ley de
we had to
estabilización de
legislate
tarifas.
on rate
Hay
stabilization law.
un artículo allí de
There was an
reconocimiento territorial,
item, an
en la
article
cual
of territorial
los territorios
recognition
que
where
llamamos
the territories that we
históricamente zonas de
historically
sacrificio que han
call
tenido termoeléctricas
sacrifice
a
zone,
carbón, es
where
decir,
there
esos
have been
territorios que han pagado los
coal-fired
costos
power
a través de
plants, thermoelectric
contaminación
power plants,
del
they have paid
desarrollo,
the
van a
pollution
recibir
cost of
una
the development
reducción de sus tarifas de un 30%,
by receiving,
como
but they
una manera
should receive
de
30%
compensar
discount
por
in the
las
rates
décadas
to
que ellos
compensate
tuvieron
them for the
y que además están
decades
cerrando
of
hoy día,
pollution they
¿verdad?
had.
Y eso es una
And
buena
these plants are
noticia,
closing
están
today.
cerrando por nuestros
It's a good news
compromisos
due
de
to
cambio
our
climático,
climate change
pero hay que
commitments,
asegurarse
but
de
we need to make
que
sure
esa
that
disminución de
this
contaminación que es
decrease
positiva no
in
vaya en
contamination, which is
detrimento
possible,
ni
does not
económico ni social,
cause
de que pueda haber
social or
unas
economic
maneras
harm
de desarrollo para ellas. Así que
and lack of development
este
for
es un
them.
ejemplo que yo creo
This is
que
going to be an
es un buen
example
ejemplo
that
de
is
cómo
a
esta
good
transición se
example
puede
on
hacer
how the
con
transition can
un
be
sello de
made
justicia.
with a
Y el mismo
seal of
ejemplo de
justice.
Coyhaique, efectivamente, en el caso
The example of
de Chile,
Coyhaique, in
probablemente
the
el
case
problema
of Chile,
medioambiental
the environmental
más severo
problem,
es el
the
tema de la
most severe
contaminación de
problem
nuestras
is
ciudades
the
en
contamination
invierno,
of our
sobre todo,
cities,
desde
especially in the
Santiago
winter,
hasta
from
Coyhaique.
Santiago to Coyhaique.
Y aquí
And
también vemos
here
grandes
we can also
oportunidades,
see
porque podemos
great
tomar medidas
opportunities
que
because
ayudan
we
a cambio
can
climático,
take
a
measures that help
contaminación, también
prevent
tiene
climate
efectos
change,
positivos
and it
sobre
also prevents
nuestra crisis de
contamination or
pérdida
pollution,
de
are also our
biodiversidad.
biodiversity loss
Y también
crisis.
hace un par de
And
semanas
a few
firmamos
weeks ago, we signed
un convenio junto con el
an
Ministerio
agreement
de
together with the
Vivienda y
Ministry
Urbanismo
of
y
Housing
de
and
Energía y Medio
Energy
Ambiente
and
para
Environment to
actualizar un convenio que existía, que
update
era el de Hogar
an
Sustentable,
agreement
en la cual los tres
regarding
ministerios
the sustainable
ayudábamos que
home,
las
where
casas
all the
pudieran
ministries helped
aislarse
that the homes
térmicamente,
could be
tener su panel solar, cambiar
had
el calefactor,
thermal insulation,
y
had their
ahora esto
solar
se
panel,
está
had their
ampliando
heater,
para que sea parte de un
and this is
trabajo
being
en un programa que existe
expanded
hace muchos años que se
for a
llama
program that exists
Quiero
for a
mi
long
barrio,
time that says, I
para
love my neighborhood,
escalarlo
to
a la escala
escalate
de
it
barrios.
to the
Me
neighborhood scale.
entusiasma mucho el trabajo que
I am
podamos
very
hacer ahí.
enthusiastic
Lo
about the
anunciamos al
work
tiro
that
con
we
un
can carry
piloto
out there. We're
en
going to have
una
a
ciudad
pilot or a test program
Rancagua,
in
cerca
Rancagua,
en la región de Higgins, en
in the
Machalí,
region of O'Higgins in
para
Machalí,
ver que estos cambios efectivamente
to see
traen
that these changes
bienestar,
effectively
¿verdad? Traen bienestar. Vivir en una
create
casa bien
well-being,
aislada,
to have a
con paneles
well-insulated
solares,
home with
sin
solar
costo de
panels,
electricidad,
without
es
electricity
finalmente
cost,
bienestar, y ahí entonces se
is
materializa muy
then it
claramente
materializes very clearly
estas
that these
transformaciones son
transformations
finalmente
are
transformaciones
finally
positivas
positive transformations
para las personas.
for the people. In I have a long question here. I'm not going to read it, by the way. Don't worry. I think I've said almost everything. But lastly, this sustainable development, I mentioned it already, it's not just a government task, but it's also a task for the private sector. And we launched in March a committee that we call Carbon Neutrality and Resilience. We invited a large number of players, especially from the private world, non-government world, with which we could sit and think about ways to accelerate carbon neutrality, measures that could move the needle, that could be easily applicable with this sense of urgency. So the first week, we're going to have a first presentation with the ideas that are appearing, and soon we're going to be able to share them with you. But we're very enthusiastic about the conversation that we have seen here. We have achieved to attract the private sectors, that we have several ideas on how we can take this opportunity. So I want to thank you for the report. I'm going to be listening attentively. For Chile, sustainable development is the development that we need to achieve. And for this, we're working in cooperation together with all over the country. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Minister, for these words. And now that we're going to remove this podium to watch the presentation of the report, I want to remind you that you can share your opinions in social media with the hashtag RedCAF in all caps, and follow the social media account of RedCAF and of the university. We're going to show now the report of economy, renewed energy, fair energy transition for sustainable development. To introduce this report, we invite to the stage Mr. Fernando Álvarez, Senior Economist of CAF, and Lilian Alouf, main economist of CAF. She has a PhD in the University of Rochester and is graduate from the Central University of Venezuela. His interest areas are macroeconomy, international economy, if you excuse me, and economic development. Before having this position in CAF, he was a researcher, economist in the Central Bank of Venezuela. Lilian Alouf has a PhD in economics by the Carlos III University of Madrid, and Master in Economics in the same university. She's graduate in economy on the University of Córdoba, Argentina. The research interests are in macroeconomic development and international trade in developing economies. So here we have, with a round of applause. Good night, everyone. It is a great pleasure to show you or introduce to you our renewed energy report, Energy Transition for Sustainable Development. If one thinks about the human story, at least recent history, you can think about a lot of things, but one of the things that we can't ignore is that we've had an enormous material progress. If we look at the last 70 years, so if we look at the last 70 years, the GDP per inhabitant of the planet has been multiplied by 4.5 times. This, regardless that it hasn't been uniform or equal in all countries, it's an unquestionable development. Regretfully, during that time, the greenhouse gases emissions caused in part by this development and this development model have been multiplied by more than 6. The noxious effects or harmful effects of this development process with emissions are starting to be felt now. The temperature of the planet is today 1 degree centigrade higher than the pre-industrial era, due mainly to the greenhouse gases associated to human activity. And with that global warming, what has
se
happened
ha
is that
incrementado la intensidad
the
y severidad
intensity and
de eventos
severity
climáticos
of
extremos
extreme climate events
que
has increased,
pegan con
which
especial
hit
fuerza en
very
América
strongly
Latina
in
y el
Latin
Caribe.
America and the Caribbean.
Inundaciones,
Floods,
sequías
droughts,
y tormentas
and
que tienen
storms, which
importantes
are
costos
very
sociales
have
y
important
económicos para la
social
región,
costs for the
han
region.
empezado a ocurrir, como dije, con más fuerza. Desafortunadamente,
So now,
lo más,
unfortunately,
lo peor podría estar por
the
venir.
worst could
Digamos,
be
a los
to
ritmos de
come.
emisión actual,
At the current
nos quedan 29
rate of
años
emission, we
para
have
alcanzar
been
el
29
tope de 2
years.
grados centígrados por
It's
encima
taken us,
de la
it's
edad
going to take us
preindustrial.
29
Un
years to
valor
reach
que ha
the
sido
top of
reconocido por los
2
científicos como
degrees
una suerte de
centigrade,
punto de
a value
inflexión
that it's
a
sort
partir
of a
del cual
turning
podrían
point
haber efectos
from which there could be
y masivos
devastating and
en la región.
massive
De manera
effects in the
tal, esta
region.
situación
In this situation,
apremiante ha logrado un importante consenso a nivel global
we have achieved an
sobre la
important global
necesidad
consensus
de
about the need
transformar
of transforming
radicalmente la forma
radically
como
the way
consumimos y
in which we
producimos energía
consume
para
and
lograr
produce energy
reducir las
to be able
emisiones
to
y así
reduce
garantizar un
emissions
poco
and
la
guarantee
sostenibilidad del
the
planeta.
sustainability of the planet.
Entonces es fundamental
It's
avanzar
fundamental
en un proceso de
to
transición
advance
energética
in a
que si
process of
bien
energy
todos los
transition
países,
that
digamos, que
although
integran el planeta
all the
deben
countries that integrate the
en alguna
planet
medida
in some measure,
transformarse
they
y
should
habrán algunos
transform,
elementos
and there
comunes
must
como la
be some common
electrificación
elements like
o la
electrification
o la
or
penetración de los
the
renovables.
penetration of
También es muy
renewables.
cierto
It's also
que cada
true
país
that
debe
every
avanzar
country should advance
respondiendo a sus
responding
particulares
to its
realidades
own particular realities
y aprovechando sus
and
específicas
leveraging
oportunidades.
their
Para la
opportunities
región
and advantages.
hay algunos
For the
elementos que
region,
son
there are
importantes
some
destacar.
elements that are very
Lo primero,
important to point out.
ya lo habían destacado
First
en las palabras
of us, it
iniciales,
was already
es
mentioned in
nuestro
the
nivel de
initial words,
desarrollo.
opening words,
La región
is our development
tiene
level.
todavía
The
unos niveles
region
de
still
PIB per
has
cápita muy por debajo de los países desarrollados,
GDP per
unos
capita
niveles
very
de
low compared
pobreza
to developed
bastante
countries
altos
with high levels of poverty,
y es
and
una región altamente
it's a
desigual.
region
Y no es
which
lo mismo hacer la
has a
transición
lot of
bajo esas
inequality,
condiciones
so it's
que una vez habiendo
different
superado
to
estas brechas.
transition
De
under
manera
those
tal que
conditions
para América
or
Latina y el Caribe,
than doing it
el
after
futuro
this gap
implica
or
ciertamente reducir las
inequality has
emisiones,
been
pero el
overcome.
futuro también tiene
So
que
the idea is
implicar
to reduce
crecer
emissions, but
e
the
incluir.
future needs to
Además de
imply,
esto, la
grow
región
and
tiene
include.
importantes
Besides that,
recursos
the
fósiles
region
y los
has
recursos
important
fósiles
fossil
son parte de lo
resources
que
and they're
dinamizan
part
muchas de
of
nuestras
that
economías,
moves many of
de
our
manera tal que la
economies, so that
descarbonización
the
puede afectar de
decarbonization
manera
could affect
importante los ingresos
importantly
fiscales y los ingresos
the
externos de estos
government
países. Uno
income
de esos
and also
recursos
the
fósiles
external income
es el gas,
of these
cuyo
countries.
uso en la transición
So these
podría
use in
ofrecerle
the
a estos
transition
países ricos
could
en
offer these
combustibles
rich
fósiles
countries that are
algunos
rich in
recursos para
fossil fuels,
financiar
could
su
provide some resources to
desarrollo
finance
sostenible.
their sustainable
Y una tercera
development.
característica
And
que
the
tiene
third
la región
characteristic of the
es
region is
que
that
el 80% a nivel global, el 80%
80%
de las
of the
emisiones
emissions
de
at
gases
a
de efecto
global level
invernadero
of
se
greenhouse
originan
gases
en la energía.
are
Eso es cierto para muchos
originated
países de la
in
región,
energies.
pero
That's
para
true
otros
for
países de la
several countries of the
región
region, but
también
other
hay un
countries,
conjunto de
there's
emisiones
also a
muy
set of
importantes
emissions which is
vinculadas
important
a procesos de
related to
deforestación. De manera tal
deforestation
que
processes.
esos países
So
tendrán
in
que
that way,
mitigar
these countries
no
are going to
solo
have
en
to
el área
mitigate
energética,
not only in the
sino
energy
también
area, but
en el
also
área,
in
esta otra fuente de
the
emisiones.
this other source of emissions.
Entonces, esto nos lleva a esa pregunta de
This
ese
brings
triple
us to
desafío,
that
cómo
crecer,
crecer,
three-way
reducir
challenge.
emisiones
You need to
y a la
grow,
vez incluir.
reduce emissions, as well as
Una
include.
primera aproximación
The
a la
first
respuesta a esa
approach
pregunta
to
puede
the
verse
answer
en
to that
esta
question can
sencilla
be seen
ecuación
in this
que
simple
dice
equation.
que el
It
crecimiento de
says that
emisiones de un país
growth of
depende de
emissions
tres
of a
factores:
country depends on
de
three
su
factors:
crecimiento poblacional,
their population
de su
growth,
crecimiento del PIB per cápita y
the
sus
GDP
emisiones
per
por unidad
capita
de
growth,
producto.
and the emissions
La
per
región se ha
product
comprometido
unit.
en reducir,
The
así como todo el
region
planeta, en
has
reducir sus
committed to
emisiones. Y
reduce their
debido a
emissions.
nuestra transición
And due to our
demográfica, nuestra
demographic
población todavía
transitions,
se
our
espera que crezca,
population is
y
still
debido a la
expected
necesidad
to
que
grow,
tenemos
and
de
given the
cerrar la
need
brecha
we
de
have
ingreso
to
con
close
respecto al
the
resto del
income
mundo,
inequality gap
nuestro
with
PIB
the
per
rest of the
cápita
world,
debe crecer.
our GDP per
La
capita
única
needs to
forma de
grow.
balancear
The
esto
only way to
es
balance
que haya
this
una
is
importante
to have an
reducción en
important
las emisiones
reduction
sobre
in
PIB.
the emissions based on the
La buena noticia es
GDP.
que la región
Now, the good news is that the
ha tenido
region
avances
has
ya
had
en lo que va de
advances
siglo
already
en este
during
factor.
the century in this factor.
A una tasa, la
At a
región ha
rate,
reducido
the
las
region has
emisiones sobre
reduced
PIB a una
emissions
tasa
all
de
over
alrededor de
GDP at a
0.7
rate of
anual.
0.7 per year.
Pero no ha sido
But
suficiente
it hasn't been
para
enough to
contrarrestar
be
el efecto de
able
la
to
población y
counteract
del
the effect of
crecimiento del PIB
population
per cápita
and the
y
growth
lograr
of
ese
GDP per capita
crecimiento con
and to
emisiones, que es lo
achieve
que se
that
llama
growth with
el desacople.
emissions, which is
Entonces,
called
esto hace
decoupling.
necesario que
This makes
profundicemos
it necessary
en
for
toda la
us to
estrategia de
deepen
mitigación
the whole
para poder reducir
mitigation
aún más las
strategy
emisiones sobre
to
PIB
reduce
y
the
lograr
emissions
ese
over
anhelado
GDP
desacople.
and achieve
¿Qué
that
cosas son
decoupling.
necesarias para reducir
What
esas
things are
emisiones sobre PIB?
necessary
Bueno,
to
las emisiones
reduce
sobre
the
PIB dependen de dos
emissions
cosas
per
que están muy
GDP?
vinculadas
It depends on
a
two
lo que
things
es
that are
la
very
agenda
related to the
o la estrategia energética.
energy
Por un lado, la
agenda or
intensidad de
strategy.
emisiones,
First of
es
all,
decir,
the intensity of the
esa unidad de
emissions.
energía que
That
tanta emisiones
energy
produce.
unit that
Y eso está
produces
muy
that
vinculado
much
con la limpieza de la matriz
that unit of
energética.
energy that produces so
Y
much
por el otro lado, la intensidad energética que
emissions,
está
and on
muy
the other
vinculada
hand, the
a
energy
lo que es
intensity, which is
pero
related,
no exclusivamente a lo que
but
es la
not
eficiencia
exclusively
con
to
la que
efficiency
consumimos energía.
by which we consume
Entonces, la
energy.
agenda, esa
So
estrategia
that
energética
energy
debe
strategy
tocar un conjunto de acciones
needs to
que
touch
impactarán
a set of
la
actions that
oferta,
are going to
impactarán la demanda y por
the
esa vía
supply and
podrán
also the
reducir
demand, and that
la
way they
intensidad de
will be
emisiones, la
able to
intensidad
reduce the
energética y la
intensity of the
intensidad,
emissions, the
las emisiones
energy
por unidad de
intensity,
producto.
and the emissions
Vamos a
per
ver
unit of
entonces en lo que
product.
queda de presentación un
So
poquito
here
la
in the
estrategia en estos dos
presentation,
ámbitos,
we're going to see
no
the
sin antes
strategy in those
mencionar
two
la
areas
importancia que
without
tienen las
mentioning,
diferentes
not
fuentes de
before
emisiones,
mentioning
lo que es la demanda
sources
representa
and
hoy
the demand,
aproximadamente el
which
54% de las
represents
emisiones de
54%
América
of
Latina y el Caribe. Por
the
eso es
emissions of Latin
fundamental
America and the
mitigar
Caribbean.
también en
That's
el lado de la demanda.
why it's
Los sistemas
fundamental
eléctricos
to mitigate
representan
from the
alrededor del
demand because electric
32%.
systems
Para la región del
represent
Caribe está un poco
31%
más
of the
balanceado,
region,
45 y
and for
43.
the Caribbean
Un
it's
rubro muy
45 and
importante
43. It's a
representa
little bit more balanced. So
este 12%
this
que
15
tiene
and
que ver con las
12% that has to
emisiones
do with the
asociadas
emissions
a los
associated
residuos sólidos.
to the solid waste.
Ese valor es 3%
That value
en
is
los países de la
3%
OCDE, lo cual
in the
señala con
OECD
claridad
countries,
la importancia como estrategia de
which
mitigación
points out the
también
importance of the
de
strategy of
utilizar
mitigation
principios
to
de economía
use
circular y de
circular
manejo de
economy
residuos
principles
sólidos en
and
nuestro país.
principles and
Veamos ahora cuáles
solid
son
waste
los
management
elementos
in our
centrales
country,
de la
which are the
oferta.
central elements of the supply. Well, thank you very much, Fernando. What I'm going to do now is tell you which are the strategies to decarbonize the supply or to reduce the emissions that come from the supply. To decarbonize the supply, we can think in different stages. For first, some things that we can already do. One is working on the efficiency of the systems. And in this graph is how much of the input of primary energy that we apply to produce electricity in the left graph is how much is delivered and how much is lost in the transmission, distribution, and transformation process. And what we see is that 65 of the energy, primary energy input that we put to generate electricity are lost in those processes. There are parts of these losses are inherent to the transformation process and distribution process, but there are other losses that could be prevented, improving efficiency or the way in which we produce electricity. For example, substituting open cycle thermal plants for combined cycle power plants. Another thing happens with the fuel, where 22% of the primary inputs that we put to generate energy are lost in the transmission and distribution, and some fugitive emissions, which are emissions that happen even before burning the energy input. So these fugitive emissions are very important for the case of the gas because they remove part of the competitiveness. But in the case of the gas, we even taking into account this loss of competitiveness due to fugitive emissions, the gas is a fossil fuel which is cleaner that we have access to, and what we are showing here in the report, or the exercise that we run in the report, is what could be provided for us as transition fuel by gas.
So what we do here is to try and see how many would be the emissions if we could substitute oil and carbon by gas. Many processes are production processes that enable this substitution, this replacement. And so what we can see is that 65% of emissions that the region has committed to can happen by replacing oil and carbon by gas. So gas could be an ally for the region to reduce the emissions while we carry out the transition to complete decarbonization. Well, now, for complete decarbonization, like Fernando said, we need green electrification to try to electrify as much as possible and try to use other fuels. So the rate of electrification of the region is 20%. The commitments acquired say that this rate of electrification should get to 40%. But that 40%, we can't reach it just anyway. We have to get that with an important penetration of renewable and unconventional renewable energies. So, and to have an idea, generation of energy has to be multiplied by 3.6 because the demand of energy, of electricity in this case, will increase. And the generation based on non-conventional renewable energy has to be multiplied by almost 14. So, of course, this is an important challenge in the penetration of non-conventional renewable energy. Generation based on hydroelectricity will have to be multiplied by 1.5, but it's already important in the region, so growth will be a little smaller than in the other cases. An important factor of the non-conventional renewable energy, and a challenge that they have is the intermittence. And to face that, we have two mechanisms. One are the dynamic prices that show how scarce the energy is at some moment in the day. During the hours of sun, we can use solar energy. Then, of course, during the day, it's easier than during the night. So these dynamic prices should help to produce as much energy as possible during the day and less during the night. And another mechanism which is important are the backup mechanisms, which say that what happens when we can't generate energy with non-conventional renewable energies. And here an important role is played by batteries, energy integration that enables systems to compensate during certain hours of the day or climate situations. And in this point, an important role can be played by gas during the transition, operating thermal plants that function with other systems. Another important point mentioned in the opening words as well is the need of investment to get to green electrification. We need to duplicate the scope of the grid, and we have to adjust to the specificities of NCRE. So the difference with renewable energy is that they're more atomized, they have smaller sizes, and they are most of the time they're farther away from urban areas, so they need really transmission lines. So another characteristic which has to do with the regulations is that NCRE also enable distributed generation, which will bring a challenge of how we charge energy, and also while the systems enable this, consumers will be able to produce energy as well. So I can they have a solar panel, and if I consume less energy, I can sell it back to the system, and that can work up to a certain point as a mechanism. And also non-conventional renewable energies have higher fixed cost and lower variable cost, which can be different in tariff schemes. Finally, the third pillar of the cleaning of the energy grid are clean fuels. There were 60% of the energy grid that would be not offered by electricity, but covered by fuels. And what we have to do is make these fuels clean. And clean fuels include two groups: biocombustible biofuels, where we have countries in the region that are leaders like Brazil, and so they don't compete with food safety, or we have to increase farming productivity, we have to produce in degraded lands and use urban and farming waste. Another low clean fuel is hydrogen of low emission, which still has challenges in terms of cost of distribution, which are very high, and also production costs that are very high, and therefore we need innovation. Both for biofuels and for hydrogen, we require new regulations and certifications, because both things will require to show that these biofuels are not produced with deforestation, or that green hydrogen is not taking away energy from the consumers. Other measures, of course, that are absolutely necessary but insufficient, given the magnitude of the mitigation that we have to do. At some point, 50% of emissions come from demand, of course. So, but to fulfill the needs of decarbonization, the goal of decarbonization, we need to carry out action on the demand side as well. And in general lines, this implies the electrification of the majority of the use that we can get, change behavior, and in the final demand, and promote energy efficiency. Concretely, the concrete actions will depend on what segment we're talking about specifically. Among these three segments, we're talking about industries, homes, and transport in general. Homes in the region tend to be responsible for a small proportion of emissions, but that doesn't mean that it's not necessary to do mitigation here, because this could change over time, and also in a way to develop our economy. Industry and transport in Latin America are almost 50% of the emissions, and in the Caribbean they're about 42%. What can we do in each one of these segments as a mitigation strategy? Like I said, in the industries, we have to electrify all processes that are possible to electrify, and of course modernize machinery in order to promote energy efficiency. Many of these industrial parks when we compare them to developed countries, they're still different. There are three pillars that are very difficult to electrify because of the nature of their production processes, and typically the temperatures that they demand. This is cement, steel, and the chemical industry, and they together represent 60% of the emissions of Latin America and the Caribbean, and that are absolutely essential for the development and for production. To understand what space of mitigation we have in these three sectors, we have to go deep into how these production processes work. We see this in the report, and it in the report indicates three actions: penetration of clean fuels in these production processes, and substitute fossil fuels to make some production processes more efficient by identifying, for example, some inputs that have a high cost in terms of emissions, and to try to replace them. For example, in cement, it's responsible for more than 80% of the emissions associated to all the production of cement. So the substitution or the replacement of that input is key to mitigate this in this sector. And the other important element, we've said this at the beginning, is introduce principles of circular economy and recycling. For steel, we can produce steel using just scrap metal, and then we can use electrical ovens, and then we reduce emissions. Notably in the Latin America and the Caribbean, this method is used a lot in a greater proportion than in the rest of the country. So the steel in this region has less 12% less emission in the rest of the world, and it's 25% more friendly than China. So it's very important to use this kind of principles in production processes. That it's shown here. As for transport, which is a sector that represents a quarter of the emissions, of course, we also, again, it is important to talk about what segment we talk. When we talk about load transport or cargo transport, heavy cargo, of course, the logistics and motors have to be improved. The report says that 40% of the transport of heavy load is it has emissions, but empty, and we can improve this with better logistics. So these kind of things are important to use. The other thing is the penetration of clean fuel. Again, we've got experience with that, and but it's not used a lot. Once we solve problems with green hydrogen, it's a great option also for transport, and for those spaces where there is enough scale, the cargo in train could be an attractive alternative as well. When we talk about light load, which is the last mile, when we distribute into the cities, here, when there is space for electrification, and there are already many initiatives in the region in this sense. When we talk about urban transport of people, or passenger transport, the strategy with the highest impact seems to be the strengthening and the electrification of public transport combined with person transport, which seems to be have the most impact in terms of mitigation. Of course, electrification of private transport, but electrical vehicles are still expensive. Also, it demands charging infrastructure that's non-existent. And finally, it doesn't solve another problem associated with transport, which is congestion, of course, which another thing that is so important that, of course, this solution is welcome, but it's not the magic bullet in terms of passenger transport. When we talk about homes, like we said, it represents a very small percentage, and it's because of two reasons: the level of development and also the needs for heating, which are not that important in the region because of the climate. But that could change according to how we develop economically, and then the demand of energy can increase in the homes, and climate change itself can start demanding more electricity for cooling, maybe, and for climatization. So we have to really take into consideration space for mitigation. And of course, it's important when we talk about packaging and efficient houses, we also improve devices as well and improve efficient use. But in this segment, what is also important are some gaps in terms of access and affordability. The region in the past 20 years has seen important progress in terms of cleaning the kinds of energy that get to the homes. However, still in 8 countries of the region, wood is the main energy source for homes. And of course, there's important proof of and evidence of the impact that can have on the health of the home, which of course is heavier. The impact is greater on women and children who are more at home. So we have to reduce biomass in homes, and that is a very important strategy. Today, homes in Latin America and Caribbean spend about 6% of their budget on energy. And that could be 10% for some countries, and especially the poorer countries. That's very high. So, and we know that energy transition can demand subsidies, tariff changes that in some way could, compromise accessibility and affordability of energy. And of course, we have to take care of that in public policies. And finally, we have access to electricity in rural areas that has improved, but still in 6 countries of the region, more than 10% of the homes, of rural homes, have no access to electricity. So there is an area of of intervention that's very important as well. And in rural areas, urban areas, we have the problem of informal connections to the distribution systems, which is something that we have to work on as well. All these strategies on the demand and supply, we have to complement them with some transversal strategies, including circular energy, which can be important for companies, but also for the development of biofuels, for example. We have to incorporate circular economy. That's very important. The development of technologies for carbon sequestration that can be important for a generation in a fossil base, and that has an impact on the backup with gas, for example. So added to this, it's important to introduce taxes and markets of carbon, which can not only increase tax income, which can be a source of financing for make that prices internalize producers and that reduce the levels of contamination. And two important things, energy, and according to the National Agency of Energy, is between 30–40% of the reduction of emissions will happen with technologies that are not mature. So we depend on innovation to materialize, to be able to assume. Of course, this demand and financial resources are very important, that are of greater importance of countries in development. The energy transition will
Esto quiere decir que nos va a traer desafíos y para la gestión de desafíos fiscales y externos para los países, especialmente los productores de hidrocarburos, y desafíos financieros también, porque muchos de los países están apalancados sobre estos recursos, este capital fósil, y pueden generar algunos cimbronazos en los sistemas financieros en su conjunto. Y por otro lado, pueden afectar también el mercado del trabajo. En cuanto a los impactos negativos en los sistemas fiscales,
the fiscal systems and the financial systems, there are countries of the region, like Trinidad and Tobago, that have a strong dependence on fiscal collection of fossil resources. And these economies will need to rethink their production grid and see how, during transition, they can use gas and see how they can fill these systems to make public policies and finance the energy transition that need this financing. As for the market and economic transition that imply changes in the way we produce, this will affect the labor market, and because there will be jobs that will disappear and new jobs that will appear. In the report, we show that what we call, for example, green jobs that will increase the demand of energy, and currently less than 30% of green employments are, which means that 70% of the workers will have jobs that won't increase demands, and so the countries have to think about public policies to retrain them and train them so that the transition of these non-green jobs will be softer and more agile to these new demands that will create green jobs. We, of course, need new skills. We just move the workers from one side to the area. And what we see in the report that we don't demand the same or require the same skills. We need more abstract skills. So we will need public policies to retrain. Well, opportunities. The energy transition are not only challenges, of course, but it also gives opportunities. The regions that have lots of critical minerals have possibilities, give possibility for the region not only to have an impact on the extraction, and also, for example, lithium. More than 50% of the lithium resources are in the lithium triangle between Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. Peru and Chile are rich in copper as well, and there are other critical minerals like graphite and silver that will be crucial for energy transition, and that the region has resources to exploit this. Another dimension of opportunities is clean energy. We can think that insofar as the world penalizes fossil fuels that have a content of carbon, the production with green energy will gain value. So if we can attract investment, domestic investment, regional and global, that can replace the use of dirty energy by clean energy, where the regions have the capacity to produce, this could be a source of competitiveness and investment and a source of development for the region. Well, for exploitation of critical minerals and for power shoring, or the possibility to be competitive based on clean energy, we will need, of course, good business surroundings that attract investment and make sure that contracts will be fulfilled and they will be able to recover their investment. So to close off, what we've seen in the presentation is that energy transition is imperative. All the countries have to do this at their own pace and with their own characteristics. This transition will have to be fair. We have to recognize that Latin America and the Caribbean has, of course, different levels of growth. They will have to close the gaps of growth with the developed area that has lots of differences between the rich and poor, and history is different. CAF, as a development bank, has committed to give funding and carry out these reports, and they also give knowledge so the countries can face the challenges of the different problems of development, in this case energy transition. And we hope that the report that we have edited is helpful for the countries for the design of public policies to face the energy transition in a fair way. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fernando and Liam, for the presentation of this report of economy and development of 2024. And to comment on this report, I would like to invite Francisco Muñoz to the stage, Director of Generating Studies in Chile. Warm applause for him. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. We wanted to give some comments. I'm the study director of Generadores de Chile, which is a group that represents companies, electricity companies in Chile and the rest of the world, also Latin America. How do I change the slides? Well, I will use a few slides to refer to certain topics. The report, of course, offers a wide perspective of all the challenges of energy transition in the region. And these kind of studies are very useful because they remind us that the efforts of reducing emissions are not limited to the electricity sector, but include all sectors of economy. Spanish doesn't help us a lot because when we talk about, in English, talk about decarbonization, people understand that it's reduction of CO2, but in Spanish the term is more like withdrawing carbon, which is incorrect, of course. So it concludes all the sectors of the economy. I won't talk about all the topics of the report. Of course, I haven't read the entire report yet, but the executive report has already got 60 pages, so that says something about the size of the report. So I don't want to touch on all topics. I will just refer to the challenges of energy transition and opportunities from the perspective of electricity systems, and also because we have very limited time, of course. And like the book says, the region faces challenges that go beyond energy transition. There are many challenges related to development and inequality. I won't refer directly to these topics, but in the end, I will finish with a reflection that in some way connects to these points. So the first thing is, why are electrical systems so important to reduce emissions? Many studies indicate in the world, not only in Chile, electricity will play a double role in reducing emissions. On the one hand, electricity systems on average in the world have an important participation, an important share at the level of CO2 emissions in the entire world. And second, electricity will also be an enabler to decarbonize other sectors of the economy, like transport and heating. This is a graph from a study that we did in General de Chile some years ago, which looked at the optimum point to go to decarbonization. And as we can see here, electricity generation will reduce emissions towards 2030 at least by 60%. Initially. But then there are other challenges, which are the other sectors, transport, industry, building and mining. And for these other sectors, the study also showed us that electrification will play a very important role. We can see this here in the different sectors, transport, industry, building, mining, and the total. And in these optimum trajectory, we will have an increase of electrification, what we will need to reach the reduction of emissions targets. The second point I wanted to mention, which is also talked about in the report, which are the advantages that Latin America and the Caribbean face. This graph shows the percentage of share by technology, by electricity generation. We've got carbon, gas, diesel, and in blue we see the different, and in green we see renewable energy, including electricity. And as you can see, if we take a picture at the end of 2023, renewable generation represented about 30% of the electricity generation in the entire world, including Latin America, of course. So if we make a contrast with Latin America, the same graph, we see that the light blue area is a lot larger. It covers a larger part of the graph, and that is because the electrical part of Latin America and the Caribbean has had an important renewable participation in its entire history, and that has to do with hydroelectricity. So Latin America has lots of experience by managing electrical systems with a high share of hydropower. And the second thing is that electrical systems in Latin America already in 2023 are based on 2/3 of their grid based on renewable generation, hydro power and solar and biomass. And that's not the only thing, because the report talks about the installed capacity of electricity in Latin America and the Caribbean is close to 200 giga, and the total potential is almost 700 giga. So if we could develop the entire potential of Latin America and the Caribbean, in theory we could replace the demand or supply the demand of 17 countries. Well, and this of course gives several opportunities. And the second thing is related to this graph that I find very interesting, which is the wind and solar energy potential. Sun is horizontal and vertical. We have wind energy. Chile is there on the right-hand side, and that's one of the reasons why we shouldn't be surprised that there is so much interest of investors for renewable projects in Chile. It is related to the characteristics of the country, but also the quality of renewable energy in the region. If you can see here, practically all the countries of the region have solar resources of quite good quality, because above this, they're in the second half of the top half of the graph. And wind energy is quite variable. It's because the progress of reduction of emissions in the different countries won't be the same because resources are not the same. So the costs are not the same either. So this also gives us a message of opportunities. If we could develop an interconnected grid, interconnection of the grid between countries, we have a tremendous potential to use the characteristics of the different resources to be distributed throughout the region.
Well, let's take a photo of at the level of emissions of the electrical systems or grids in the world. This came from World in Data, and the different colors show here the amount or the grams of CO2 equivalent per energy unit of the different electrical systems of the world. The darker, the higher CO2. And if you see the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, you can see the colors are a lot lighter, and if Latin America was a country, it would have a level of emissions of about 200 grams per kilowatt hour, given that the world average, including that, is almost a double. If you remove Latin America and the Caribbean from that average, the rest of the world will be a lot higher. And this means that the electrical systems of the region are cleaner in themselves. What's the message? If you wanted to advance quicker with electrification effort, the electricity on average provided by the electrical systems of the region is a lot cleaner than the rest of the world. Well, also there are challenges in the region. The region is well positioned to deploy all its renewable resources, but one of the challenges is the variability of the renewable resources, specifically solar and wind resources. We placed a graph of a week of generation. You can see that there are weeks in the wind that the wind just disappears. In Europe, the US, we're talking about wind droughts, and they match extreme climate event. When there's a heat wave or a cold spell, that creates a low availability for wind energy. It could not only last a couple of hours but it could last a couple of weeks. The demand's still there, but we are not generating. And also we have to talk about the solar integration. This is the famous duck curve generated in California. This is the demand of energy when you remove solar and wind energy. So we have less and less demand to be satisfied by the other technologies. What is the challenge there? The morning and afternoon peaks going down and up. So we need to be able to plants that can leave the system and enter very quickly when the sun goes down. And these are qualities that we usually didn't have to request from the system, and we're requiring that a lot more now. How do you see the days which reach the news and the press? We have October 30, for example, the national grid. At noon, the system reached a 94% of renewable participation, and we wanted to take a photo of this, get an X-ray of that. How does the day look with high renewable? So you had during the day a lot of solar generation, a lot of wind generation. There are other colors as well. You have hydro generation, which allowed to manage the variability, and there was generation with gas and coal as well. So that's the mix that allows to integrate this renewable generation. Well, possibly this is going to be changing in time, because the graph that appeared in the New York Times in California, the batteries are reaching the news now. The California system has very similar graphs to what we see in Chile, but during the day we have a lot of renewable energy, but some things appear again. We have more energy from the day, the afternoon, but also you have some attributes that what we saw here. We have gas generation, natural gas, hydro, and they have also nuclear. And there's something that we don't have such participation in Chile, which are imports. They're so they have more tools to manage this variability. Well, what's the message here for closing? We need to review the signs to see that all these technologies that provide flexibility and assurance and security, energy security, are available for the system. Another challenge of the report has to do with the incentives for generation on cost structure of renewables. We extracted this graph from the red report, and here you have 1 day of the Chilean system, and in Uruguay. And what I want to point out here are the prices, which are the curves that are blue. And something that's happening in both systems is that half of the day you have prices that go to zero. This is very interesting for people who don't work in the energy sector because they think it's an aberration, a problem with the regulatory design. That's not the fact. We always have had zero price in our system. There are negative prices, and these are the price signals that provide incentives so that the companies develop batteries. You're going to have a battery that arbitrates the energy between the day and night, so it's going to charge on the day and release the energy at night. This is what happens in the systems. I place this graph here to the left, historical prices in the Brazilian electrical system. When it rained a lot, there were even years that the prices were zero, and that was not a problem because since Latin America learned to resolve this risk of price variability, it was with long-term contracts. The CAF report also talks about this, the importance of long-term contracts to provide stability and energy security, so that the investors can leverage this. So this is an attribute of the systems with high renewable penetration. Let's move to the last challenge here, which are the networks, developing transmission and distribution networks. I like the cover of The Economist, where you say that if you're an environmentalist, please hug the high voltage pylons, not the trees, because we see that a robust transmission system is an enabling condition to be able to integrate renewable generation. Bloomberg and Energy Findings says that to reach carbon neutrality, we're going to be needing 21 trillion, of which are $1 trillion in investment in power grids. I always confuse trillions and billions because trillions is billions in Spanish, billones. So it's the best moment to invest in transmission lines was 15 years ago, and now it's back again. So this is associated to infrastructure. Different from generation, the transmission lines take a long time to develop. Not, for example, a solar plant that can be operating in a relatively short term. So that's a challenge for the planning. This graph, this is the graph of the CAF report, which shows the length of the distribution and transmission systems of several countries in Latin America when compared to what's going to be needed if you want to reach carbon neutrality. And what we're seeing is that these networks are going to have to double. And this creates a lot of challenges. You have challenges associated to cost, there are challenges associated to permitting, and also to competition for the territory, which is not only limited to transmission infrastructure, but also generation infrastructure. Renewable generation is quite intensive in in meters in land surface area. So there are different ways to plan networks, thinking of multiple possible scenarios, particularly with renewable generation matrix. You need to think of all the possible scenarios that can happen when you have a high participation of hydro generation. There could be dry years, very humid years, and the idea is to have a network that is as robust as possible to manage all those scenarios. And also we talk about the technology, we're talking about digitalization, and there's a large opportunity for networks. There are modern technologies which allow to make a better use of the existing networks. They don't need to develop new infrastructure, and this applies for the distribution. The distribution networks are owing to us. If we think of distributed resources, efficient integration, it's going to be necessary to modernize or update those distribution networks. Here, some thoughts about integration, energy, electric integration in Latin America and the Caribbean. There are several countries that have interconnection, that have a long cooperation history. The interconnections allow to do several things. For example, that countries export their surplus energy to other countries which have a deficit at the time. It provides more stability to the networks, and when you have a network with a lot of renewable variable participation, what happens is that the largest the network, it is cheaper to integrate more renewable variable generation. What's the challenge here? Well, we need to advance in all the political issues that are required to place all the benefits on the table, and all the countries are convinced that it's positive to advance in this direction. We also need to be careful with the comparisons on the countries depending on the level of interconnection they have. Sometimes we see that, for example, you compare Uruguay with Chile. Uruguay has a high level of wind and power participation, but Uruguay has 100% from 14% connection index than the demand. So you could import all the energy from the neighboring countries and not start any plant in Uruguay. Chile, the case is a level of interconnection very low and faces other types of challenges. So when you want to learn from the Uruguayan lessons, those lessons do not apply because Chile needs to solve its own problems of energy stability and variability by themselves. It's important to keep that in mind in order not to make comparisons that are not valid. To close now, a final message is that the focus is cost efficiency. The environment minister of the environment talked about the framework on climate change, cost efficiency, resiliency, and what does cost efficiency mean to reach the emissions goals? Reduction goals at the minimum cost possible. Something I missed in the report and an indication for future reports that would be nice to dedicate a section on this is something reported by these OECD reports, which are called effective carbon pricer. And the word effective is very important because these are the prices, the actual emissions prices which are implicit with emissions. There are several countries that have taxes, have tradable permitting systems, and they're direct and evident, but what we're seeing in that same report is that there are many policies that do not have direct prices, and they have shadow prices, and they could be very high. Here you have some quotes on some policies in Europe of subsidies that might have a shadow price for the emissions that is quite high, and they can be very effective in the conducts they want to modify, but not necessarily cost effective. And in a region that has the income gaps in the context of development and GDP that we have, it is more difficult to think that the region can forget the cost efficiency in carbon neutrality policies, because this could make more expensive the cost of the transition unnecessarily. So, and this is what we don't want. So, to close, I wanted to thank you for the invitation. It's a great report. It allows us to have a 360-degree outlook on all the challenges of energy transition, and it was a pleasure to take part in this event. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Francisco for this presentation. Now we're going to install the chairs here on the stage to have a conversation panel which is going to analyze part of this report. CAF acknowledges the need of carrying out a fair energy transition focused from the point of view of Latin America and the Caribbean, acknowledging the specific realities of each of the countries in the region and the need to cover development lags in history. Here, we also highlight the experience and the potential of Latin America and the Caribbean to be able to accelerate the energy transition in a sustainable and inclusive manner. To carry out the event in the Adolfo Ibáñez University is very relevant because for the business school and the climate change agenda, the climate change agenda and energy transition is at the core of their concerns. incorporating it as one of their work axes, being aware that this is the most relevant challenge for the future of humanity and also for sustainable business. We are going to move to the discussion panel to a sustainable energy future, challenges and opportunities. It's going to be moderated by Ms. Veronica Frisanzo, General Knowledge Manager of CAF. She's a doctor in economics by the State University of Pennsylvania and graduate in economics by the Pacific University in Lima, Peru. She was also a main economist in the Department of Research of the International Development Bank, and she could describe it as applied microeconomics, and her main specialization field are development and labor economy. In this panel, we have the Dean of the Business School of Adolfo Ibáñez University, Juan Carlos Llobet, who is already sitting. We invite Maria Olivia Ricard, President of Women's Community and Director of Companies. And here we have Claudio Maggi, a strategic business in Corfo, the Production Foster Corporation of Chile. Well, thank you very much for being with us in this launching of the Economic and Development Report 2024. Thanks for the panelists for being here with us and all the support they provided us in the preparation of this event. And thanks to our Executive President and our Corporate Vice President. They generated this inflection point in the roadmap highlighted by our Executive President of the 20 years of the in network. The issues that we're talking about, issues that were repeated in the region, but they were the usual problems, and we didn't have an outlook of the new problems. Since 2023, that we launched a climate change and biodiversity network, and with this energy transition, we see this turning point in the issues that we're covering and that incorporate the new challenges for the region. This is not going to stay here. Obviously, we're going to have other issues that are coming that we're thinking about, but the report of today is special because it shows number 20 of a trajectory of contributing with knowledge for the region with a very clear outlook on public policy. We have less time than what we thought about for this panel. But we could have stayed 2 hours with experts like you. I'm very sorry, but we're going to try to go a little bit faster and use your presence here. I wanted to begin with Juan Carlos and a little bit cover a point that was covered in the presentation of the report, that were these industries that are quite difficult to decarbonize: cement, steel, and chemical products. Here, it becomes a challenge to lower the emissions of these sources, and here green hydrogen appears as a potential power source to reduce emissions. Which challenges do you believe the green hydrogen faces for an efficient adoption in the Chilean economy? Well, thanks for the invitation to the panel. Well, I believe the hydrogen is mentioned in the context of those hard to electrify industries because they think that hydrogen could replace the fossil fuels and lower emissions in the production of cement, steel, and others. Now, hydrogen needs a lot of renewable energy. In Latin America, as we saw in Chile and other countries, we have a lot of potential to produce a lot of renewable power at a very low cost. But it also has other challenges. It's not enough to have good renewable potential. We need to build a lot of infrastructure. Hydrogen is not enough to build power generation. We need plants. We need ports, transmission lines. So the permitting, we call it in Chile, to obtain permits that cover standards and in the time that corresponds, it's going to be a challenge. This challenge has an influence in all the industries of mining. We don't have time to go in depth into this because it's one of the where a larger share of the population understands, where we have spaces to influence and to have the energy transition. And the report is that we need to build a lot of things. The energy transition is not of stopping development, but developing infrastructure, build many things to be able to change the way in which our economy works. This is the greatest challenge we have. And the cost is the problem of producing hydrogen is a lot higher than the fossil alternatives. This has to do with lowering the cost of electricity, but also the electrolyzers and all the annex materials that you need for that. And here, like in other technologies, is the chicken or the egg. If you want to lower the production cost because you don't have enough demand, that allows the manufacturers to escalate production and lower the unit cost. And that demand is not there because the price is too high. So that's where the public policy can help
acelerar el desarrollo.
To accelerate the hydrogen generation. But it has an important role in decarbonizing those industries that can't be electrified directly, and also connect us with the research and development goal in these phases of decarbonization that we're facing. Then we move to Claudio. We know that 36% of the reduction of emissions until 2070 comes from technologies that are still in prototype phase, and almost 40% comes from technologies which have a very early adoption. It's fundamental then to promote research and development, but not only from the private sector, but also from the public sector, and also maybe it hits us from the multilaterals. Which diverse roles you see for these players in that area? Good question. There are several roles. Like Juan Carlos says, we are facing challenges which are enormous and systemic, but also in the case of Chile, an enormous opportunity of addressing these challenges in the configuration of the energy matrix and energy transition, which implies how we are adopting this transit in different production sectors. Many of them related and contributing to the transformation of the energy matrix. In the case of the energy, well, the graph showed it was a great potential in clean energy sources, and also associated to mining, that in the case of copper and lithium are very critical minerals for this transition, not only in electromobility, but also in the case of energy storage. And as you point out, there are challenges not only in research and development, but also in technological maturation, and how that we face the transfer and adoption of technologies challenges. We have capacities, for example, science poles from research to be able to be applying and advance and accelerate this technological maturity, and also generate the traction from the demand from the different sectors and the sectors as they adopt them. But this implies necessarily have a mix of policies, from the more known policies of research plus development plus innovation, and then we can have an ecosystem when we have an early connection between players, avoiding this typical coordination faults that our energy system have more than are the northern countries, but also implies to generate the capacity for the sectors not only have spaces to run pilot tests for this transition, and also the incentives. This is the taxes and the energy market. On the report carries a key role. You're seeing how, for example, the emissions of emission reduction certificates and the trading of these certificates is advancing faster than what we thought in Chile, and it begins to be an incentive so that the industry adopts earlier this kind of transition. For example, in programs we have developed recently, we have to accompany the transition of the agro industry, where you can produce ammonia. So there's also an interesting relationship. In mining, doubtlessly the reduction of the carbon footprint is fundamental in mining, and they're advancing strongly, not only in the fleet issues, but also in the mining processes, which are very important, in logistics, in the manufacturing industry, in all the sectors which are complex because they're large emitters and that actually match with the perspectives of the hydrogen economy. You see that potential early adopters of hydrogen. So it's a system challenge, and you need to hit several drums at the same time and connect the different sectors from the knowledge contributing to these challenges, and then you have from the challenge of production the adopters. Thank you, Claudio. And it's not casual in the mining issue, appears without mentioning it, but it's something that's going to be appearing in these matters. Maria Olivia, talking about critical minerals in Chile, one of the countries in the world with higher reserves of copper and lithium, I wanted to have your opinion of the other effects that has mining exploitation that are common. And there's also environmental and social impacts. How do you think you can minimize these impacts? And how you can generate more direct support to the local communities from these ore bodies? Well, we have the rain outside and a warm soup and waiting at home. So we're going to do this in 2 minutes. I hope my husband is cooking. That they have. Some people said they have the wife with the kids. Well, I have a husband that cooks for me. I want to comment because I believe the book. I read the 60 pages, just like I am a nerd, so I read the 60 pages. I found it very interesting to compare the countries in Latin America, but I was missing a sort of public policy side, which should be more realistic. There are examples of small things that are being done because clearly, the steel industry, it's interesting to transform them, but the transformation is produced from what's small to the large. We have solutions that are going to have storage that has to do with batteries, where they're going to be produced, and where they're going to be installed. We have the possibility of people that you generate. So there are thousands of examples in Latin America, and the productive process could be very interesting. I didn't find it as fun. So I would have a chapter of different things. And there's a graph, and I don't know in which there is. I marked it in my summary, but there's a graph.
I will make a gender comment, which is very important because there's a graph on. So the writers look at it. It's page 49 of the summary, graph 10. I'll go sit back. It starts by saying that the differences between green and non-green, and the first item says man. Never. It says we should say gap. If you want to say that there are more jobs for men and women, I don't know whether that was debated, but the graph is made in a way that it doesn't take up the new industries for jobs for women, and the jobs in non-conventional renewable energy jobs is high. There are enormous opportunities for education of people, not only installers, repair, cleaning work in operations for women. I think I missed a bit an analysis in that area, especially when percentage or 10% of more jobs in Chile means 1% of growth of the GDP. And you, who are economists, I thought they were electrical engineers, but they're economists, and I think we need a bit more gender in this study. And I will make a third comment. that that can be improved, and that critical areas are rare earth and minerals, and the rare earths things that are used in energy transition. Without rare earths, we have a bottleneck, a technological bottleneck, because batteries have been solved, and some of the efficiency of the batteries has been solved. Copper, we know what it's used for, and magnets today are dominated by Chile in rare earths. There is no geopolitical independence to produce rare earths in the world. Chile has a pit in Penco. I have a particular interest because I'm very much interested in this project. Brazil has them, and the United States. Rare earths in Brazil and in Chile have exceptional quality in terms of the fact that they're not radioactive, and they have generally very high grade. So there's an important opportunity here in Latin America, and you didn't talk about rare earths and not about women. I think that's very important. The rare earths are very important, I agree, absolutely. I didn't look at the graph, but I'll look at it in more detail. No, I didn't see it when I read it, but well, the copper, of course, I think people understand very little how important it is for energy transition, because the connection, like the report says, we have to electrify everything that we can electrify, and electrify of energy is copper. So we move electricity over through copper cables. So everything that we take out of the sea, we have to bring it into the land by with copper wires. So Chile produces 25% of copper in the world, and to maintain the market share in copper that we have today towards 2030, we have to invest like $70 billion, and it's very difficult to obtain permits to build copper mines, and very often, and maybe it's politically incorrect, but very often the opposition of the development of mining projects comes from the same groups that want to fight for climate change. So there's some inconsistency. So we can't reduce mining. We doesn't mean that we have to do mining at any cost or at an expense of low standards. But if we don't do mining, we will increase the price of clean energy, and then the problem will be larger. So I think Chile, which is a mining country, and that's not very well understood. And of course, those who can talk about that history and we tell that story are guilty of that. And of course, other critical minerals and rare earths are very important. But copper is the spine of. Well, yes. First, we have to recognize that the challenges in terms of permits are great, but we're building consensus. There are 2 bills now that have been presented and are under discussion to make all the enormous diversity of sector permits that we have, that have been the result of several layers of bureaucracy, if you like. But we're going in that line, and also we're improving there. Also environmental permits, which have the same situation, but we're clearly on that path. We have to recognize that there is this consensus that can help to solve an important pain. And the second thing is related to the fact that the challenge of copper, we have to maintain that. But there has a second challenge, which is to progress in that copper, we can export that, at least refined, to the rest of the world. If we export it in a concentrated way, puts us again in competition with China. So we have to import it, export it, refined, of low emission, refined, etc. So that is a wonderful opportunity that we have to recover terrain and incorporate knowledge and progress. Maria Olivia, let's go back to you. First of all, I believe that we've reached the goal is to generate a debate around this topic. This report is like an encyclopedia because we had to generate that knowledge, encyclopedic knowledge. Well, as economists, of course, you had to learn a lot about it. And I think it's very valuable that we receive this kind of comments about the report, because the idea is to, of course, show the reports like we do this every year, but also, of course, take up all this feedback and make working groups. I want to make another suggestion before I will go home to eat the soup that my husband is preparing. This book gives an important opportunity for school material, because the audience or the public of the book is a bit undefined. When you read it, there is some part of the information is for PhDs in electrical engineering, but there are some parts that are interesting for economists. So there's enormous possibility to make a book, a didactic book, to diffuse knowledge, because this topic is central for the development of the countries, and communities. Yes, well, to inform communities what is going on when we install solar panels, what is generation, what is distribution, what is green hydrogen. And this book doesn't take the base they don't start from the basis that people don't understand. Well, this could be a book, a school book, and then it would be famous. It teaches everybody what we are going through in this energy transition that has to be fair. So that's good. We're trying to transform these reports in more didactical material, courses, in more friendly ways of well, I've read many energy reports. I've read them many over the years, and I think it's very clear. It's very well shown. So congratulations to the writers. The presentation was very good as well. Well done. Well, you touched upon it, which is a detail. I like to go back to the topics that you previously talked about. You know, this effect on the labor market. When you referred to the table or to that graph, there are many people who show that energy transition in a very optimistic way. So don't worry, because we will just decarbonize and we will create a lot of green jobs, and the losers won't be losers because they'll go back into the economy. I wanted to hear your opinion about that. We've got the dean here, so I will try to make it more fun. The world of information is really staying behind in terms of the challenges that we have towards the future. There's a study, if we need a study for cleaning panels, we haven't got them, or to generate. So they have to be incorporated into the curriculum, not only engineers, but also of economists, for example. I think in economy today, I don't know whether at the Faculty of Economy in the universities, something is taught about transmission and energy transition, which is one of the pillars of the business school here of the university. Yeah, of course. He was prepared for that. Well, at the Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, at least we do this. But so we have an enormous deficit there, and we have a deficit also, and I think the president of CAF mentioned it, artificial intelligence, digitalization, use of data to be able to understand what are the best ways to go to this energy transitions, and which are touched upon in the report, and which are an enormous source of opportunities. But jobs, employment, it's not very intensive in man hours, like we said. No, it's not person hours, man hours. Well, an effort was made by the mining industry several years ago, and it makes a connection between the industry and the world of education. So if the industry says these are the demands that we will have in the future, these are the skills that I'm going to need from these workers, and this informs the capacity for the technical and university education. Sometimes there is a disconnection between these two. So it's very difficult to educate people that then don't have a job. So, because Fundación Chile also did this with the Mining Council and the government. Yes. Okay, very good. Well, I have a few questions more. I won't let you go yet, but they will be the last questions. Juan Carlos, you were speaking, so I will come back to you. Transport, of course, is one of the complex areas in the report, not only because we have to electrify, because in Chile we've made lots of projects, progress there, but we're pioneers, but we need the demand, we need people to use public transport, we need to promote it more. What space can you see here to go deeper? Well, I believe that change consumption habits of people is very difficult, and there are many examples. We saw that with Macron with the yellow shirts in France. It happens especially with people of lower income. There are many of those in the region. When you have to choose cleaner energy, and if you have to adjust a budget, which I find very difficult, people, of course, choose for budget and not green energy, especially when the policies are adverse. So what this implicates is something that Francisco said in his presentation, is that we have to focus on technologies that are more efficient in cost. For example, an electrical taxi driver is very good for a taxi driver, because it's very efficient in cost, because they drive many kilometers. The saving will be considered over time, because the cost of fuel, of energy, is a lot lower than and then the initial investment is reasonable. For private cars, that doesn't really make sense unless they travel many kilometers. If they use it only for going to work and to take children to school, it doesn't really give a return on the investment. So that's another example how public policy has to give incentives to accelerate energies that are more efficient in cost. So then further ahead in time, when energy will be cheaper, then other energies can be used. For in Chile, we're very much advanced in electrical buses in public transport. The same thing happens with the taxis, because they also drive many kilometers. So we have to we can improve participation of the share in the fleet, because they're more effective in cost than other energies. So in transport, it's possible. It's most likely that public transport, land transport, will be electrified, and then private, and then marine and air transport is more difficult to electrify. So that will be done over time, or will be made more efficient. It could be earlier, but of course the budgets of companies, governments, and families are scarce. We have to help really for that money to go into the energy that is more cost efficient and other areas of transport.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. And I close with you, Claudio. Also, returning to the Chilean case, where we have the solar and wind potential, we were seeing that in the presentation by Francisco, there are several issues to address and to discuss regarding rates or tariffs regarding the cost of this non-conventional renewable energy. What changes do you consider that are necessary for the Chilean case to foster the appearance of generators in the country? There's an important challenge in matters of improving our model and our system of distribution and transmission of energy. And this, of course, alters the logic of the incentive for investment. Our tariff system is thought for a 30-year-old energy matrix. And here we see how the decouplings we have, to use another term, I use the same word with another meaning, so the speed of including clean energy and our capacity to take it to the demand point is important, and has a cost which is large in efficiency from the renewable energy market. There are several opportunities. Hydrogen opens an opportunity outside of the network, and to have a logic of distribution, but it requires overcoming several challenges of coordination, and it's quite far still. We have a tariff situation that is not very favorable. We're aiming to an update of power tariffs because in the case of the consumers, is not matching the promise of clean energy incorporation of 30 years ago. So I'm not going to give you the answer. It's not our job to do so, but we do have an important gap, and the solution is systemic. We need to address in a better way the distributed networks and address them with a lot more strongly, and to generate incentives for that or implement those incentives, and on the other hand, to be able to advance as much as possible in updating the gaps in transmission or advance towards a system outside the network. I believe it was said here before, where you have examples from micro to macro, we are able to build a better system. But we have a job to do there. Well, I also would like to thank you once again for your participation and close in a positive note, because gathering what it was said by Francisco and begin in a cleaner energy matrix to Latin America and the Caribbean, and leverage that transition as a great opportunity for growth and inclusion. So the examples you were mentioning, and I take home some of these messages, we're going from the micro to macro, and coordination as keywords that imply hard work for the policymakers on the region and also for us in the way that we are disseminated knowledge. What's positive is that it's a great opportunity for the region and that we can't miss it. Thank you very much again for staying until now. Okay, thank you very much, Veronica, and Juan Carlos Llobet, and thank you for participating in this panel. To end our event, I want to invite to this podium the Undersecretary of State, Real Estate, Heidi Verning, and we're going to receive her with a great round of applause.
Ay, parece muy mucho. Bueno, buenas noches.
Good night, everyone. Probably you have, you're more willing to leave for your homes than listening to me. I want to thank the invitation to CAF to close this event, but above all, I want to thank for the report, because what happened recently in the panel provided a sample of that this is a report that was not only submitted today, but is going to be discussed in the future with some suggestions as well from other areas that can be covered. I also want to thank Juan Carlos Llobet for receiving us here in the UAI and to be part of all the work that has been carried out with the green hydrogen policy from the side of the government. There's nothing else that I believe that I could add, especially because thinking of the time, but I believe that clearly us as Chile and Latin America, we have a challenge, which is very important. And this publication shows this, where our transition towards carbon neutrality, we take it from a different standpoint than the rest of the countries of the world. And in particular, in the case of Chile, we've talked a lot about our abundant solar radiation in Atacama, persistent winds in Patagonia. I saw the fluctuations of the winds that were showed previously in the comment. He is there. But I was imagining in Magallanes, I don't know when the winds stop, but I guess eventually there could be some fluctuation. So clearly, plus the large lithium reserves places at a level which is different on how we face these challenges, and we have a comparative advantage to transform our energy matrix. As a matter of fact, that 20% that appeared in the work, in our case, is 40. So we're clearly in a different position and footing, and that we have important problems to solve, such as was pointed out, the areas of transmission, other regulatory aspects, such as that was appearing in the times of development of the projects. Here, I would like to briefly point out that we are facing this challenge. We have a legislative fast track that we agreed upon with the Parliament, which has 21 bills, and 2 of them, for example, the sectoral permits, and another one, the update or modernization of the environmental law, which was in the beginning, Minister Maisa, I don't know if she mentioned it, but in that bill for us, it has to do with proportionality when evaluating the project in the environmental impact assessment of the projects. Another important part has to do with the effect of the project in decarbonization. And this is an area that concerns us especially in the drafting of this project. Both are in the first stages, but we're approved in the different conditions. We are in the particular discussion, and us as Ministry of Public State, they're not projects that are going to be, we're going to be on them, because I believe they're totally relevant, especially in the case of our agreement for economic growth, social well-being, and fiscal responsibility. We believe it's important that we need to do this without sacrificing the protection standards. Maybe it's not covered a lot by the book, but we have the opportunity, but we don't have, we can't miss it, but we are not going to sacrifice our protection standards. And in that sense, we talk a lot about permits. Permitting, it seems that somebody can just remove it, but they have a reason to be there. All of us like to go to a good restaurant to drink the soup of Maria Olivia, but we wouldn't sit calmly if we don't know that there are regulations that allow us to get home safely after taking the soup. So the same thing happens in all areas of our economy. But we need to be attentive that once we draft these bills and the roads are improved, then we're not going to build another tree of new permits. So there's other projects that have to do with the reform and modernization of the state, which are public policies and productive policies. I can tell you about a few years ago, with Malala, we had to go to get to know the Agency for Public Policies to Spain, and so many years I'm going to be working in that bill that has been in 4 governments in the government programs, so it's not something minor. But in that lapse of time, this agency that's going to be, was going to be thought to evaluate programs and public policies and their impacts and results, has a very relevant role in what it's going to do, which is evaluate the regulatory impact. If we see the report of OECD, where we have the largest gap, is not in evaluating our results of our programs and how we carry out a continuous improvement based on that. It is in the regulatory impact evaluation from the new regulations as well as those already existing. I believe this agency is the other side of the coin, regarding compared to these other bills, other 2 bills that have been talked about here. And of course, lithium. Lithium is also a great challenge for us. Chile owns 42% of the reserves of the world of lithium, and it represented 34% of the production in 2022. Now, for us, it's fundamental to implement the national strategy of lithium, maximize the productive potential, with a minimum social and environmental impact, but of course in a timely manner. This is not something that we can let go by. And in that sense, based on the 2 bills that I mentioned, the Public Policy Quality Agency and the implementing the national strategy for lithium, I believe that agreeing on this and decreasing the levels of uncertainty at the time of investment is key. An example of this, and here it was mentioned, the mining sector was mentioned here, is the mining royalty. Due to an agreement, we reached a bill that was passed in 2023 in August, and today, based on that higher certainty in the investments, we need to, according to the record of the capital asset and equity assets, the mining investment increased to more than $18.8 billion. Before the royalty, that number was 5,400. Agreeing and provide certainty to the investment is the roadmap that we need to follow. This work helps us to analyze the challenges, not only of Chile and Latin America, but we have an important opportunity when seeking growth and with the growth for well-being for all of our country and our region. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Undersecretary Heidi Berner, for these words. And finally, we invite to this podium Cristiana Zeneni, Corporate Vice President of Strategic Programmation of CAF, for his closing words.
Good night to all of you. It was difficult to make your presentation. I'm very sorry that your María Olivia soup is getting cold, but I would like to thank Juan Carlos and the team, the entire team from the university who made this possible. And we had a very interesting talk before this event. Also, I would like to thank Minister Maestro Rojos, also Heidi, for accompanying us here until the end, and for all the work that we do together to improve the relationship between CAF, Chile, and all the members of our bank, the all team, knowledge, Jan and Neston and others, Martin, who made this work possible. 2 years of work, I think, is admirable, and we would like to thank you for the commitment that you have to carry this through. Thank you for the public and all the journalists. Tomorrow we will be getting up very early. You've been working with us for 2 days. Thank you very much for your commitment. Tomorrow we will be doing Atacama with the entire team. So we will have an interesting day tomorrow. And as you have seen, as the Development Bank, we have a clear conscience that energy is a vital input for everything we do. Beyond the explanations about how over time the energy sources have changed in our region, in time, substitution of wood by carbon and the incorporation of oil and gas, how the fossil fuels in some way have started to contribute more than 80% of the energy, and that growth, the quality of economical growth that we want to continue to have at a growing has also brought about a growing rate of carbon emissions, and this has led us to a level that is almost incompatible with the planet. So therefore, the transcendence of these studies is very important for the energy transition, and because the Ministry of Environment said that this energy transition has to be fair, because first the intergenerational dimension. Now the current generations present here, we are affecting in some way, or we see ourselves affected by the greenhouse gases. The future generations, if we don't do anything, they will be connected and affected by in the same way. International dimension, it was also mentioned by the Ministry of Environment. Emissions of the rich countries are different from the emissions here in Latin America and the Caribbean, which which is something that we have to talk about when we talk about just energy transition. And the third dimension, of course, is internally for Latin America and the Caribbean, and is that as a region, especially the Caribbean, as you all know, is in some way we are feeling the most severe effects of climate change. So we, as the CAF, as the development bank, especially the last years, and our manager of infrastructure works a lot on this. To continue financing projects of many millions of dollars in the last years. We've done this for projects of energy transition to be able to tend to the projects of renewable energy, to extend green hydrogen, because we want to become the green bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, and this makes that all our countries have to collaborate so that the financing projects have a green component and can help to work on that grid, to align, as we have seen, our work goals with the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, and to work with international agencies, with green funds, etc., for our region, so that these studies, like Sergio said, and our manager Veronica underlined, for more than 20 years, we've been doing this, but we have to focus a lot more on the current need to carry out this exchange of views to the future, because if we don't improve the practices of our public policies to be able to generate this change that our economists talked about in the dynamics of consumption and production, we won't be able to change the grid that we give to our children and grandchildren, to give them a world that is a better world and that is more livable. So we want to be that generation that made the change, so that they tomorrow and the day after tomorrow don't have to live in a worse world than the one that we're living in today. So this is everything I have to say. Well, the soup will be cold, but there's a microwave to heat it up. Thank you very much, Cristian Esinelli, for these closing words. And on behalf of CAF, the Development Bank for Latin America and Caribbean, and the Business School of the University Adolfo Ibáñez, we conclude this event. We thank you for accompanying us here this day. We remind you that you can see this event again on the website caf.com and on the other YouTube channel, and also the web and the social media of the university. Those who have accompanied us on streaming, thank you very much. Those who are here in person can enjoy the reception and a cocktail here at the right-hand side of the room. Thank you very much for being with us.